want to bring you back to the summer. It was late July. I was sitting in my office one morning and I got a call. The call was from a gentleman who, for this evening's talk, I'm going to call Michael. Michael wanted to know if I was the guy who was on the radio the previous day talking about Crohn's disease. Now, I'm interested in the immune system. I'm especially interested in the immune system when it goes wrong and causes disease. The previous day, my group had just published work describing and identifying a new protein in our body called plino-3 that may be able to protect from diseases like Crohn's disease. Michael rang me to ask if he could help with our research, so we started the chat. Michael's in his mid-30s, but he told me around 10 years ago he started getting very unpleasant symptoms. So very severe abdominal pain, cramping, serious diarrhea, loss of blood, and fatigue. At that stage, Michael was a truck driver, and these symptoms were beginning to take over his life. Every night, he would sit down and meticulously plan his journey for the next day. But as part of that planning, it would always have to involve bathroom stops every 30 minutes. This got too much. Michael had to give up his job. Michael was eventually diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Now, Crohn's disease is inflammation of the digestive tract, usually of the intestine. We're all familiar with inflammation when it happens on the outside. So, for example, if you get a skin infection, the area becomes red, it becomes swollen, there's pain associated with it. Despite these unpleasant symptoms, inflammation is good, because the purpose of inflammation is to get rid and eliminate the infection from the body. That's on the outside. What about the inside? Well, the same thing happens. The only difference is you can't see it, but usually you can certainly feel it in terms of the pain. So inflammation is good, but it's very important in the case of infection. When the infection has been eliminated, it's very important that inflammation is turned off. And if it's not turned off, we end up with this fire inside or this chronic inflammation that can give rise to a whole array of chronic diseases. So how can this be? How can inflammation be good and bad? Well, on this cold November night, I want to give you a quick analogy. So if you go home tonight and light up a nice open fire, and you have a pleasant evening, from that perspective, fire is good. But how about you waking up in the middle of the night and your house is on fire? This is not so good. So there are two clear cases, good and bad. What's the difference? In the first case, the fire is under your control. In the second case, it's out of your control. It's the same with inflammation. When the inflammation is under the body's control, it's beneficial. If it goes out of control, we end up with chronic diseases. And how those diseases manifest really depends on where that chronic inflammation takes place. So, for example, if it's in the lungs, we can end up with asthma. In the joints, we can end up with arthritis. In the skin, diseases like psoriasis. But there are other diseases you probably don't associate with inflammation, where inflammation plays an important role. Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and indeed some forms of cancer. So this brings me to my big idea. If inflammation is driving all of these chronic diseases, is it possible to come up with one treatment that will stop inflammation and treat all chronic diseases? So just imagine that, one drug or one medicine that can stop inflammation and treat all these diseases. It may sound like a crazy idea, but I hope to do over the next couple of minutes is convince you that it may not be that crazy. So what I'd like to do now is have a look to see how we can put that fire out, how we can stop the inflammation. Ideally, we would like to stop the fire from being lit in the first place. And if you look in terms of the triggers of inflammation, what we know about inflammation, there are different triggers, but one of the main triggers is obesity. Obesity induces this simmering, this prolonged state of inflammation that will lead to a whole array of chronic diseases. So that's just one example. By treating, obviously, the obesity issue in society, that may be a single way to address many of the chronic diseases. But what about if the fire has already been lit and the inflammatory disease has already been started? Well, if your house goes on fire, you'd like to catch it as early as possible. It's the same with an inflammatory disease. You want early diagnosis. But this is frequently a challenge. If we take Crohn's again as an example, the symptoms of Crohn's are shared, many of them are shared, for example, with ulcerative colitis, another inflammatory bowel disease, and colon cancer. And this can delay diagnosis. And meanwhile, that fire inside, that chronic inflammation, keeps on going. So part of the research effort at my lab focuses on trying to get a diagnostic that will allow earlier diagnosis of Crohn's. This is especially relevant to children. About a quarter of all inflammatory bowel disease cases arise in children. It's especially important to diagnose early in children because diseases like Crohn's are associated with growth retardation. So we're working with some paediatricians in Crumlin Hospital trying to address that issue. So let's say we now have a diagnosis for an inflammatory disease. What drugs can we use to turn that inflammation off? And is there a single drug? Well, if you look over the last 50 years, the most widely used anti-inflammatory drugs are steroids. Steroids are pretty good anti-inflammatory drugs. The problem is they do many other things and have many side effects. They cause weight gain, increased blood pressure, osteoporosis, and a whole array of side effects. The reason why steroids have these side effects is because, as well as targeting inflammation, they also interfere with our basic metabolism. So, is it possible to design a drug that maybe only targets inflammation and not metabolism? Well, there's a group of drugs now called biologics that work by targeting proteins in our body that normally drive the inflammatory response. And if you look at this year, 2013, probably the highest grossing, if not the highest grossing, at least in the top 3 highest grossing drugs in the world, is a biologic that targets inflammation. This will gross in excess of $10 billion this year. It has been licensed for the treatment of 7 different chronic diseases. So maybe this idea of one drug treating all these chronic diseases isn't so crazy after all. One of the diseases that this drug has been licensed for is Crohn's disease. So I asked Michael if he had been given this drug. He told me that 4 years ago he was put on this drug, and he said it totally transformed his life. The quality of his life dramatically improved. But sadly, this only lasted for 6 months. So the drug was given once a month. On the 6th administration, Michael experienced a very severe allergic reaction. The treatment had to be withdrawn. Since then, Michael's life has returned and it's one of suffering. He very poignantly describes to me how night times are worse, where frequently his wife and children are asleep, and he spends a lot of the night in a bathroom. And mostly what he thinks about is that 6-month period, and desperately hoping to get back to that with the discovery of new drugs. One of those nights was actually the night after I was on radio, so he decided to call me the following day. First of all, he said he had no idea the research of this type was going on in Ireland. And the second thing he said, he was surprised that it was such a high level. So my research group published in a journal, it's called Nature Immunology. It's the #1 immunology research journal in the world. If you look at immunology research across Ireland, it ranks number 3 in the world. This has been primarily due to major investment over the last 10 years in basic biomedical science. However, this policy has changed, and over the last 1 to 2 years, the funding of basic biomedical research is no longer the priority it was. And I really worry that Ireland may lose out on the opportunity of consolidating the gains over the last 10 years. Ireland is one of the leading countries for the manufacture of these biologics that are used to treat inflammatory diseases. In some cases, we produce most of the world's supply. The question I want to leave you with tonight is, why can't we also be leaders in the research that will lead to the discovery of new drugs to treat these chronic diseases? We have the talent. In fact, we have some of the world leaders in this research area. Let's not waste this opportunity that this talent offers. Thanks very much.